you hear all the time from the right, oh, Second Amendment gives you an individual right to bear arms. That's it. And in fact, the Supreme Court, under the massive hypocrite Scalia, said that you have a right to a handgun. Now, he's the guy who keeps saying the Constitution is not alive. He recently said it is dead, dead, dead. You must strictly interpret the framers' intent and the language of the Constitution. Now, in the language of the Constitution, of course, in the Second Amendment, it says that you need a state militia. That's why you have a right to bear arms.
Absolutely not true. Nowhere does it state that you need a militia to guarantee your right to bear arms. That is because the Second Amendment is separated by commas. Even if the commas were misinterpreted, the militia is defined as every man, woman, child, armed or not, within that region.
He just ignores that first part of the Second Amendment. Just ignores it.
As well he should. It's a ridiculous argument.
Don't worry about that language. Strict construction, my ass, okay? I'm just going to say that, yeah, you have this right to handguns that is unlimited.
Since the beginning of recorded history, the vast majority of every human that's ever walked the planet could only dream of such unlimited liberties to protect themselves from tyranny. You just have to question the sanity of somebody who's digging for a technicality to get rid of it.
Now, what's interesting is, he doesn't say an unlimited right to weapons. He says handguns are the most popular form of self-defense in America, hence you have a right to handguns. Now, wait a minute. Where in the Constitution did it talk about handguns? I thought you were a strict constructionist.
Agreed. Word technicality. That and anything else on this video, however, does not justify stripping the rights of everybody in the country to defend themselves.
Now, this is the same guy who said, oh, where in the Constitution does it talk about trimesters? The first trimester, second trimester, third trimester. Roe versus Wade is ridiculous. Really? Where in the Constitution does it talk about the difference between an assault rifle and a handgun? Oh, right. It doesn't. You made that up.
Yes, another good point on technicality, but these talking points aren't actually the main point of this video, so let's go ahead and move up to the state versus individual part.
Now, what's also interesting is that the Second Amendment was not always interpreted this way. In fact, it was interpreted quite the opposite way. Did you know that the Founding Fathers were in favor of gun control?
No matter what anybody tells you about what the Founding Fathers believed or not, let one thing be clear. They believed that you should have the right to bear arms to protect your freedom. And the fact that we ended up with that right was not an accident. They were, in fact, aware of it from the state level to the federal level.
Now, you don't often hear that, right? You know who else was in favor of gun control? The NRA. And by the way, these strict constructionists apparently never read the first sentence of the Constitution. Second Amendment, how about this first sentence of the Constitution? We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. But domestic tranquility and the general welfare be damned, because somebody's got to sell some guns.
Tranquility and welfare, in the eyes of the Founding Fathers, was gained by freedom. Freedom was ensured by the right to bear arms. If anybody would have went in and told those Founding Fathers that armed citizens would adversely affect the tranquility and general welfare of the nation, they would have known immediately that you are a nut job.
And the NRA, instead of becoming a group that represents gun owners and their members, becomes a group that represents gun manufacturers.
Interesting that this guy has a flag flying in the background. The NRA gets its money off donations. Those donations come directly from that portion of the country who wishes to send their own money to a group who will protect their firearm laws. One of the most overlooked reasons why the NRA's funds exceed that of the Brady campaign is the simple fact that the majority of this country does not want more strict gun laws.
That is much more interested in pushing out guns.
The idea that the NRA pushes out guns or somehow generates money from the sales of guns is yet another myth in the anti-gun crowd. The NRA doesn't make guns. The gun manufacturers make the guns and profit off the sale of the guns.
In fact, Warren Burger, who was not a liberal justice, he was a conservative justice, the Chief Justice. When they presented him with the idea that the Second Amendment gives you an individual right to bear arms, he called that argument, quote, a fraud. A fraud. That is a conservative justice.
This is actually a compliment to Berger as being a true conservative. It simply means that he believes that the Second Amendment was a right given to the free states collectively. In short, he believed the state should regulate a militia, being defined as the people or citizens of that state, armed or not, should in fact all have the right to be armed. Those in opposition argued essentially that your individuality was part of being a member of the United States, and that should guarantee you the right to bear arms. Either way, you were guaranteed the right to bear arms.
Late 1970s, early 1980s now. But the NRA changes, Reagan comes in, and they begin to change the whole idea. And what they do is they fund think tanks. And what do the think tanks do? Oh, yeah. The Constitution has always said that it's an individual right to bear arms.
It should have no weighting in determining what the Second Amendment actually says or the individual states' constitutions. Discrediting random people's misinformed interpretation of the Second Amendment is fun, but bickering over the idea of 1 + 2 = 3, or somebody said 2 + 1 = 3, or yet another claim that 3 was numerically equivalent to the sum of 1 + 2, is no basis for claiming that any of the three are wrong.
When in fact the Supreme Court didn't think that.
Also note that regardless of what they believed, the outcome was still the same. We had the right to bear arms.
And the Founding Fathers didn't think that.
Arguing who originally gave you the right to bear arms is mute. If it was federal, you have the right to bear arms. If it was state, you definitely had the right to bear arms. As desperate as you are to get rid of the Second Amendment on a technicality, there's just no justification for it anywhere.
And that was not conventional, was it? But here's my favorite part. Orrin Hatch, who was a senator back then as well, Republican senator from Utah, says that he found an old document that shows that, oh, secretly, they had this idea all along. I love one phrase in particular. According to his commission report, it claimed to find clear and long-lost proof that the Second Amendment to our Constitution was intended as an individual right of the American citizen to keep and carry arms in a peaceful manner for the protection of himself, his family, and his freedoms. Now, I love that for two reasons, because one, it shows you at the time, again, late 1970s, early 1980s, they think, well, obviously, everybody realizes it is not an individual right. So we have to pretend that we were right all along, and we found a long-lost document that shows that we were right when everybody realizes at this point, or thinks at this point, that we are wrong.
Very interesting turn of events that had nothing to do with the validity of the Second Amendment.
That is not the right that the Second Amendment gives you. And the second reason why I love it is, oh, well, what do I have here? Yeah. I have a long-lost document. That's the ticket. And it tells me that it's an individual right to bear arms. Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, and the think tanks agree with me that are paid by the gun manufacturers. Yeah, that's the ticket. And what did they do? And this is the amazing part. They won. They repeated that propaganda over and over and over again until people forgot that that's not true. That's not the way the Supreme Court had ruled.
Regardless of where the Supreme Court believes the Second Amendment came from, your right to bear arms was never infringed and shall never be infringed.
That's not the initial intent of the founders.
Not only did the Founding Fathers of the day believe that you should have the right to bear arms that should not be infringed, but the public representatives of every state of the day did as well. Go to the link listed below and look for yourself. If the Second Amendment was ever intended to empower the states, not only would the state's constitution in the link below have to be upheld, but also the federal Second Amendment would have to be included in those states' constitutions.
And then people are like, well, it's always been an individual right to bear arms. That's what the Second Amendment says. So by the time Scalia issues his ruling in 2008, people forgot what a giant hypocrite he is. That is not the strict construction of the Constitution. That was not the intent of the Founding Fathers. That it was a lie all along.
This argument is interesting, but either way, the same outcome is guaranteed. Arguing whether the state gave you the right to bear arms, or you have the right to bear arms because you are an individual, is ridiculous, because once you are a member of the state, you are guaranteed the right to bear arms as an individual. Now, even if you insisted on continuing this argument as to whether you needed to be in a militia in the state, consider the definition of a militia. It is the citizens of the state. Every man, woman, and child, even unarmed, was the militia. Therefore, every single man, woman, and child had the individual right to bear arms.
That's how they duped this country.
Nobody was duped. If you believe that this country was not intended to have the right to bear arms, follow this link. Look at the constitutions of the individual states. You got to be a whack job to believe otherwise.
Into having the sea of weaponry that we have now.
The Founding Fathers knew that weaponry empowered the citizens to gain freedom. So a sea of weapons would have been viewed by the Founding Fathers as a sea of freedom. These days, there's so many people like this guy who are so misinformed that they don't even understand that without firearms, you have anarchy. Even today, if you don't see a sea of weapons as a sea of freedom, you need to reassess your understanding of the fundamentals. Only somebody who does not value freedom cannot see that.
So those gun manufacturers can make more money. It was a brilliant propaganda campaign and unfortunately worked incredibly well.